Some people call me the space cowboy. Yeah.
Howdy everybody, welcome to Andy's Knowledge Report with Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. This is a special closed-door secret briefing on vital information about Scientology and the world that you need to know. Today's Knowledge Report is about what really happened to LRH. Ooh, because the last, I would probably say, 10 years of his life are a little bit murky as to what happened to L. Ron Hubbard. So I thought I'd better clear that up and say after all that I've heard and looked into and stuff, what it seems to be what happened to him. So I'm not going to say this is definitely what happened, but I'm going to say this is what's most likely, and that when it comes to the death of L. Ron Hubbard or the death of Jesus or something like that, you're never going to really know. Like, there are things in life that you're never going to really 100% know, but you can get to a point where you're like, this is probably what most likely happened, and you'll never know 100%. So anyway, who cares? I mean, it's not that, you know, I mean, but it'll be good to sort of get an idea of what happened. Anyway, speaking of that, I'm wearing my new, this is an Orgone energy pendant. I'm just wearing it because I just got it in the mail today, and I'm interested in seeing how it affects. It's got about 8 different gems in it. It's got like carnelian, lapis lazuli, amethyst and stuff, and a quartz and stuff, and it's got some coil, and it's something that Wilhelm Reich invented, and it's interesting, so I'm excited to see how it goes. Apparently it protects you from radiation energy and all that sort of stuff, and it might give me more energy and stuff, and stop me from getting cancer or something. Like, I've heard good stuff about it. And to people who don't believe in gems, you know, not all gems are going to affect you, but there are some gems that actually work. And I remember I first put on a carnelian gem, and I was like, whoa, like, it actually increased my ability to talk, and it gave me good luck and stuff. And because we're an energy field, and substances can change the energy field, like drugs lower your energy field and stuff you up, but you can take good things like these crystals and stuff, you can wear them, and they can raise up your energy, and they can key you out and shit. Serious. So I just thought I'd clear that up. Now, because it can, like, literally it was life-changing for me to, I mean, I started wearing carnelian gem, and then after that I found out about, like, literally really soon after that, I found out about the independent movement, and my whole life just exploded. I found out all this stuff, and it was just, I believe that some things can, you know, I believe that the carnelian has a lot to do with that. Now, back to what really happened to L. Ron Hubbard. So, L. Ron Hubbard as a person, and many other, and actually speaking of this Orgone thing, the guy who invented this, Wilhelm Reich, was actually a psychologist. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard didn't think all psychs were bad, and I don't think all psychs were bad, and I don't think Wilhelm Reich was a bad psych. I think he was one of the good guys. But there does tend to be a lot of bad psychiatrists and psychologists, and their profession tends to be a bit of a crock of shit, and it doesn't really help people. Like, for example, I'll give you a psych drug to handle anxiety or something, yet they won't tell you to go and do yoga, you know, or go in session and try Scientology and stuff and do objective auditing. You know what I mean? Like, of course they're going to sell you a drug that they can make money from. The profession's been corrupted, and it's just a money-making, they're just drug pushers, really. And the other ones who don't push drugs just waste time sitting there talking to you about your problems. You know, it's just stupid. Anyway, but some people can actually, who are smart, can actually do a good job of it and stuff. And so Wilhelm Reich, who invented this, he was a good dude. You know, he was one of these good psychs. Now, what's the word? L. Ron Hubbard uses the word psych instead of saying evil person or SP. He's just saying it's a certain type of person. It doesn't necessarily mean you're actually a psychologist. It just means that some people who are bankers and are psychs. There are some people who are like teachers and they're psychs. But they've got these, they're a psych, he puts the word psych to be, you have to understand what he means by psych. He doesn't necessarily mean every psychologist is bad. And when he says they've been around for millions of years, he's not saying psychologists have been around for millions of years. He's saying psychs, as in these shifty people who tend to manipulate people's thoughts and they have these bad characteristics. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. I don't want to talk about it. But this orgon thing, this Wilhelm Reich guy, when he invented this orgon thing, he was full-blown attacked, like the same way that L. Ron Hubbard was attacked. Like, as in, the media just ripped into him. He got, like, people attacked him, but his followers knew he was onto something and liked him and stuff. And eventually, Wilhelm Reich got assassinated, and he was taken to court, and he'd pissed off the people who were in power who run this world. This is exactly the same thing that happened to L. Ron Hubbard. Luckily, L. Ron Hubbard made it to old age and finished what you would call... Actually, I don't think he completely finished his mission, but he nearly finished his mission. Like, I don't think he fully... I think he needed to live maybe another 10 more years and he would have really completed it. But this Wilhelm Reich guy died when he was maybe, I think, in his 50s or something, and he really got assassinated. But L. Ron Hubbard was really good, and he was real switched on, and he had positive postulates and stuff. And he was really smart, and he was able to avoid getting taken down by the New World Order or the bad people who run the world, right? And so since he started Scientology, you know, people were trying to sue him, the government was trying to come after him, the FDA, the IRS, all that sort of stuff. And the attacks built up, and as Scientology got more and more popular, because Scientology was improving people and setting people free, the same as these orgon energy things, it was a good new technology that the people who run the world don't want people having. They just want slaves, right? They don't want someone inventing something that changes, you know, electricity so that they can't make money off electricity. You know what I mean? They don't want something that makes people super smart so that they don't get sucked into taking psych drugs or whatever. You know what I mean? So Wilhelm Reich and L. Ron Hubbard pissed off people. You know what I mean? You have to understand this world is so freaking corrupt, okay? If you don't know about the corruption, you can understand how you think, oh, Andy's just making up that these people got assassinated or there's people running the world trying to, you know, take out good guys. I'm not making this up. Listen to me now. This is fucking true. And I'm saying the word F word here because you need to hear it. It's true. Okay? This world is controlled by bad people, and they take out, they assassinate, they try and send them to court, they try and send them to jail, they make up crap, they come after anyone who challenges them. And L. Ron Hubbard and this Wilhelm Reich guy challenged these people and pissed them off because they were setting people free and helping people. In this world, they just want you to sell drugs, they want you to sell crappy food, and just, they'll let you make money if you're doing that. You know, if you're making some stupid app on a game that's like a little chicken playing game, they're like, cool, let people play their chicken game. You can make $1 billion selling a chicken game. That's cool. But if you come up with something that wakes people up to the matrix and sets people free, or changes the energy in the world and how electricity is made, they're going to come after you. You know what I mean? Anyway, so as Scientology got more and more popular in the 50s and 60s, the attacks on L. Ron Hubbard got more and more popular. And in I think it was about 1965 or something, Scientology actually got banned in Victoria, and that's the state that I live in. And I think in maybe one other state. It actually got banned. It got to the point where they banned it. And so the attacks on L. Ron Hubbard increased, and L. Ron Hubbard ended up going onto a boat, the Apollo. Now, he went on there because, you know, obviously he likes sailing and stuff, and he got to apparently investigate his own past track and go around the Mediterranean and stuff. But probably the main reason was because he wanted to get away from these governments that were actually raiding his churches. Like the Melbourne church got raided and they came and took the e-meters and stuff. And also a church in Washington, DC, I think, got raided in the 50s. And of course their reason was because the church was selling vitamins, and you can't sell vitamins. And so like they see how they come up with any reason to take down good guys, you know what I mean? Yet you can be Hillary Clinton, you can run a foundation that's a tax-free foundation that's a full-on scam, that's clearly just a load of crap, and none of the money actually goes to charity, and Hillary Clinton takes all the money, but she won't get picked on, of course. But if you're someone who's actually good, like L. Ron Hubbard, they'll find you and they'll go, oh, your church is selling vitamins, you can't sell vitamins, and they'll come up with some reason to pick on the church. Because it's ridiculous. It's like, why would the Food and Drug Administration have anything to do with the church? There's nothing to do with them. When they say, oh, the church was selling, you know, vitamins, so we have to come. It's so freaking ridiculous in this world. Anyway, so L. Ron Hubbard, especially around about this time in the mid-60s, L. Ron Hubbard invented a lot of upper-level technology and stuff, and started to really sort of work out how to make OTs and stuff. And so he really didn't want the churches getting raided and stuff. So that's where he sort of went to the ocean, and he thought that maybe this was going to be a trend in a lot of places. It's going to get banned, so they'll only be able to do it out on the ocean where you're in international waters, and you can't have police come after you. So he just said, F you to the world. You know, America gave him a hard time, Australia, England, even South Africa gave him a hard time. I think South Africa were the last country he sort of lived in. Well, no, sort of, anyway. He had problems with South Africa, so it was just like, that's it, I'm going to the sea, I'm going to these ships. So we went to these ships, and that was the Apollo ship. And it was cruising around. There were some other ships as well, smaller ones. Apparently at the height of the Sea Org, there was like at least 6 ships. I heard 9, but there was at least 6. Like, that's how, you know, anyway. So he like literally just said, we're just going to do Scientology out on the sea then if we can't do it, you know, in cities and shit, because you governments are corrupt and stuff. And also being on a ship, he could protect, I guess, the upper level tech, because, you know, they could see if someone's coming to raid them and stuff and all that sort of stuff. So then he eventually was on the ship until about 75, from about 67 to 75. And in 75, he came onto Florida. They went off the ships and stuff and went to Florida. But anyway, the reason why I'm saying this is because you have to understand the high level of security. Like, people were getting sent onto the ships to assassinate L. Ron Hubbard. People were trying to kill him and shit. Like, seriously, brainwashed people, patsies, MK Ultra victims and stuff, people that were brainwashed by the CIA were brainwashed and sent in to kill L. Ron Hubbard. Seriously, the government, the CIA has incredible technology, and back then, and they still do now, they can take someone and they can make an assassin out of that person, and that's I don't actually think that's what happened with the Kennedy assassination. They did the killing and then they set someone up and said it was him. But other killings, apparently, like it's possible John Lennon's assassination was done by someone who had been programmed to do it. You got to study conspiracy theories. You got to study hypnotism and how the mind works. But people can be hypnotized to kill other people. This is serious shit. So they don't teach you this sort of stuff at school, but it's true. Now, hypnotism is amazing. Is an amazing thing. So in 75, so from about, I guess 67 onwards, L. Ron Hubbard was like, he didn't have many public appearances. Like, it really died off, because in the 50s and early 60s he was touring around doing all these lectures and stuff. This really had died off at this stage, because also maybe he didn't have that much to say in lectures because he'd already done enough of that, but also because of his security level. Like, he was genuinely worried about being assassinated. So he came to Florida in 75, and they set up the Flag Land Base. And at that time as well, L. Ron Hubbard was pretty behind the scenes. He had other people working for him, and he was sort of hiding away still and stuff, like near the Flag Land Base in Florida. Like, it was hard for him to come out publicly and stuff. And then in about 77, I think L. Ron Hubbard's son got possibly assassinated. Now, people who hate Scientology say that the son committed suicide because he was gay, and L. Ron Hubbard said he didn't like gay people. And they go, oh my God, that's why the son committed suicide. But I don't think that's true. I think that and there's evidence indicating this, that Quentin Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's son, got assassinated because in old age they didn't want L. Ron Hubbard passing it on to his son, and they wanted to get their hands on L. Ron Hubbard's will. That was really important. If it was the CIA or the government or just whoever the bad people were that were trying to take over Scientology and shut it down, maybe it was the IRS or the FDA, because they were all after him. They want to get their hands on the will, so then they're in control of the church, and then the church can stop setting people free. You know what I mean? Because they don't like what the church is doing. So they didn't want to go into L. Ron Hubbard's son. So it's possible, very likely, that they assassinated Quinton and they set it up to make it look like Quinton committed suicide, which is very common, like the Wilhelm Reich thing. And then there's so many other people. I'm not even going to say there's so many other people who have died in mysterious circumstances, and they say that that person committed suicide, and it's like, that person didn't commit suicide. They were framed and made it look like they were committed suicide. It's a load of crap. Okay. So Quinton got assassinated. Also, what happened was the GO, which was the Guardian's office, which was like the intelligence department of the Church of Scientology, Okay, sorry about that. I just remembered something that I had to do. I actually put a new chair in that I was going to use for the set and forgot to use it. So I just thought, I might as well do it now before, I forget. I've got that sort of habit. And L. Ron Hubbard talks about this habit. He's like, if you see something that needs to get done, do it now. Stop delaying it. There's some policy he wrote on it. But it's really good advice. It's like, if something needs to get done, do it now. If you receive the letter in the mail, don't just open it and look at it. Read it now, handle it now. And then you just get so many things done. You just handle it now. So this chair, I was like supposed to put this chair in the set, so I just thought, I'll pause the video, I'll put the chair in now, so I don't forget and stuff for the future. Anyway, so what was I saying? So Quinton Hubbard got assassinated, most likely, and so L. Ron Hubbard got really worried. And then the Guardian's office, who were the intelligence department of the church, they had basically gone into, because the government had been attacking them heaps and stuff, and because they were intelligence, so they were investigating things and they had spies and stuff, they were finding out that the government were really trying to shut down Scientology and were really dodgy. And so what they came up with, and I don't blame them for doing this, right? They came up with this idea to, and this could have originated from L. Ron Hubbard. They came up with this idea to secretly go into government organisations and take the negative information they had about Scientology out. Basically take the lies out, because they had lies in, for example, I don't know, the IRS or whatever would have some bullshit saying L. Ron Hubbard was a drug dealer, which isn't true, because Scientology was just getting all these bullshit attacks. So they said, let's sneak in there during the middle of the night, pull out the piece of paper, saying the bullshit lie saying L. Ron Hubbard was a drug dealer, and throw it in the bin. And then if we infiltrate that government department and that government department, then the government departments won't have all this bullshit information on Scientology, and then they won't hate us, and they won't shut down the church, right? But of course, that's breaking and entering. That's legal. That's illegal. But this world is incredibly corrupt, and there was this bullshit information in these government departments about Scientology, like literal bullshit, because they were trying to shut it down. They were trying to come up with lies and stuff. This is the sort of attitude L. Ron Hubbard has. He is a fighter. He doesn't give up. If you make up lies and you come after his church, he goes, well, I'm going to come around that and I'm going to stop that from happening. You're not going to shut down my church. Whereas other people like this Wilhelm Reich guy, his movement got shut down a lot, was a lot smaller and got shut down more, and he got assassinated at an early age, because L. Ron Hubbard's smarter, and also he's a fighter. He doesn't give up, which is a good attitude to have. So, it was illegal what they did, the Guardian's office. It was called Operation Snow White, in infiltrating the government, but the government's disgustingly corrupt, especially the American government. It is a horrendous government. It is just, whoa. Talk about SPs taking it over. It is so wrong. So I don't blame them for what they did. Anyway, in about 77 or 78, guess what happened? The government found out about them infiltrating stuff. And so there was a raid on the church, and all of a sudden L. Ron Hubbard's wife was in a lot of trouble, and the Guardian's office pretty much got shut down. It happened over a few years, but when this happened, Quinton Hubbard getting assassinated like everything really turned bad from probably 77 onwards. So Quentin Hubbard dying, and then after that, the raid on the church, that was when it was like, oh my God. So L. Ron Hubbard really had to go into hiding at that point. Like there was just like no public anything at all, right? He would just meet with some Sea Org members and stuff, some Scientologists and stuff, and that was it. It was hard to get communications to him and stuff. Now, because he was worried about getting thrown in jail or thrown in court or getting assassinated, and like it was just, the security just went up to a new level at that point. And this is where he was over in California, in the desert of California, not far from LA. And so at this point, he was also getting communications from Captain Bill Robinson, who was a top Sea Org guy, a good guy, and he was quite switched on. He wasn't in the Guardian's office, so he wasn't in the intelligence department, but he was switched on to things, and he was saying how, you know, hey, there's plants sent into the organization. He was telling L. Ron Hubbard there's like, what are they called? Actually, sorry, I'm not totally sure if he got these communications to L. Ron Hubbard. I think, he discovered that there was plants in the late 70s and stuff, and there was crazy shit going on, and he almost got assassinated himself because he was trying to expose it and trying to fix up the church, saying, hey, the government's infiltrated the church and stuff. So he might not have gotten communications to L. Ron Hubbard, but apparently L. Ron Hubbard said to him that, it looks like I'm losing control of the church because he had to go into hiding, and that, you might have to consider, he said something like, yeah, he said that if you don't hear from me in 6 months' time, then just leave the church and start your own thing independent of the church, because he was basically saying, that the church has been infiltrated and taken over by the government and stuff, and so just leave it and go start your own Scientology, which in 6 months' time, that's what happened. Captain Bill didn't get communicated to from L. Ron Hubbard, and L. Ron Hubbard went out of the scene. And L. Ron Hubbard was in hiding, and he couldn't get communications to the church, because L. Ron Hubbard's plan was to, okay, I'll go into hiding because of, like, I might get assassinated and stuff, but I'll still send messages to the church and see how the statistics are going in the church and advices to the church and be a consultant and try and help the church, right? But at this point, he was saying that he'd lost control. He could no longer send communication to the church because the bad guys who had infiltrated the church, they'd gotten involved with the messages to and from L. Ron Hubbard to the church. So L. Ron Hubbard had worked that out, because L. Ron Hubbard's a smart cookie. Like, you just have to read his fiction books and you're like, this guy's switched on and smart and stuff. So he wasn't he wasn't surprised by the fact that the church got taken over or whatever, or that his communications were getting changed. Like the letters he was sending were getting changed. Letters going to him, people were changing. Like if Captain Bill sent a letter to him saying, look out, the church has been infiltrated or whatever, that wouldn't even go to him, or it would get changed. And then the letters coming from L. Ron Hubbard, people would change them as well. Notably David Miscavige, who's now the current leader of the church. He's one of the bad guys who took over. Now, so the thing you have to understand, L. Ron Hubbard wasn't a dumb guy. So he could see, so in about 1982, he contacted, what's his face? Captain Bill, who was a top Sea Org guy. He contacted David Mayo and sort of said, hey, it looks like I've lost control of the church. Go and start your own thing outside the church. And at that point, they had problems with the church as well, and so they left the church. And L. Ron Hubbard was having problems with the church, but he was in hiding because he knew the church had been taken over, was screwed over. And so at that point onwards, he was really in hiding. Like 82 onwards was really in hiding. And some people think he died from that point onwards. I don't think so. So David Mayo left, and he started up his own independent Scientology center, and Captain Bill started up his Runzorgs, and they're still running and they're successful, and I recommend going there to do Scientology and stuff. And at this point, now you get David Miscavige becoming the leader of the church, right? Now, David Miscavige was a young Sea Org guy, and it's very likely that he was in communication with the people who wanted to take over the church, and they put him there. So David Miscavige was one of the bad guys that took over the church. And many people have said this, that David Miscavige was changing communications to and from L. Ron Hubbard when he was in hiding. Like David Miscavige was changing statistics and saying this and saying that. And so what you notice from 1980, in 78, L. Ron Hubbard really started to go into hiding, and then in about 82 he really went into hiding even more. But there was, all of a sudden you start getting real problems with the church, and there was heaps of Scientologists who left in like 82 and 83 and stuff because they'd realized that the church had turned bad. Serious. And some people were even suggesting, especially Captain Bill, but other people were saying that the church had been taken over by implanters and stuff, which are bad guys, or Markabians, which are bad guys. So it's been taken over by Markabians and shit. Like seriously, some people were saying that, like they could tell. And so this is when Scientology first had its big starting of the independent movement, right? Even though there were some people who did it independently from the 50s, it was just really, really small. But it first started actually having people leaving the church and saying the church is no good. I do Scientology outside the church. And David Miscavige and these other shifty people who took over, who were dodgy people like Pat Broker, was one of them as well. And people might say, well, why would L. Ron Hubbard choose Sea Org dudes to work with him like Pat Broker and David Miscavige if they were bad guys? And then it's just like, you don't know. They could have been bribed by the people who wanted to take over the church, or they could have been brainwashed by the people who wanted to take over the church, and they could have been changed so that they turn over to the dark side, basically. Yeah, it could be money. It could be like somebody, so let's say you got Mark Zuckerberg who started up Facebook. He could have a friend that he started up with, and then suddenly he has a falling out with that friend, and the friend tries to take over Facebook, and you go, why would they do that? They were friends for years and that friend was a good guy. And it's just like, you don't know. He could have been bribed with heaps of money, or he could have been brainwashed to take over Facebook or something, you know. It seems like around this time, this bad guy, David Miscavige, came in, and Pat Broker seemed to be dodgy as well. Like they weren't even proper dedicated Scientologists and stuff, and they wanted to get in control of the church, and they stole it from him. And it was most likely they were being manipulated by the people who were like the CIA or something, whoever was taking over the church. Because it seems like there were bad guys behind the scenes who didn't want Scientology succeeding and becoming a popular world religion. And so they came in and they used Pat Broker and David Miscavige as pawns to take over the church, right? And there's stories and stuff about what happened in those around 1982 and stuff, and it's just like total out ethics. Like David Miscavige falsifying statistics to L. Ron Hubbard. It's outrageous. David Miscavige also got ordered to do a sec check because L. Ron Hubbard, was onto like the fact that there's something going wrong with the church and stuff. So he ordered David Miscavige for a sec check, and of course David Miscavige never let the results of that sec check go to L. Ron Hubbard or something, or he stopped it from going to L. Ron Hubbard. So basically, Pat Broker and David Miscavige were in a position where they had incredible power because they could control who was going to the leader of Scientology, which is L. Ron Hubbard. You know what I mean? So they weren't the leader of Scientology, but they were controlling the communications going to the leader. So it's as if they are just as powerful as the leader. And a similar thing happened with Hitler in 1945, in that the people who were second in command, like Hitler's secretary, he was actually the one who really controlled power because he controlled the information going to Hitler. He controlled the communications going to Hitler, and it looks like Hitler got screwed over in that last year or the last few years of the war. Like those generals backstabbed him, and that's why Germany lost the war and stuff. Not because Hitler made bad war moves and stuff, but because these generals backstabbed, and apparently this general went behind Hitler's back and cut a deal with America and gave them information about nuclear bombs and stuff, and gave them advanced technology and advanced scientists in exchange for, like, they cut a deal basically. And when Hitler found that out in like April 1945. I mean, Hitler was so pissed off. You know, imagine you're a dictator like Hitler and you have total control of a country, and then you find out your secretary is doing dodgy shit and it was actually controlling your information, and he was actually setting something up and cut a deal with America. I mean, that, you know, that would have really pissed him off. Anyway, so a similar thing happened to L. Ron Hubbard, where David Miscavige and Pat Brokaw were controlling L. Ron Hubbard's communications, and they screwed him over, and they basically stole the church from him. And L. Ron Hubbard had to go and was in seclusion, and he couldn't go out and visit his churches and talk to people and handle things because he might get assassinated. So at this point, you get the church releasing policies and then suddenly cancelling them because they were squirrel, and then release another one, then suddenly cancelling them because the control lines of the church were fucked up, were messed up. They'd been taken over, and Scientologists recognised it and could see how the church was charging too much for their auditing, and the church was just not doing things good. And so they left and started the independent movement. And L. Ron Hubbard was in this awkward situation in that he was an old man. He no longer could come out in public and stuff because he would get assassinated, and he could no longer communicate with his church. So what do you do in that situation? Well, he communicated with like David Mayer and Captain Bill, and said, hey, go start something outside the church, and let him know what was happening, give him an R factor. And then he started writing fiction, because he was a big fiction writer before he got into Scientology, so he got back into writing fiction, because it's like, what else are you going to do? He had all this spare time and stuff. And so he started writing Mission Earth. Now, what Mission Earth is, it's a fantastic book series. I've only listened to them, like the audiobooks, which cuts out a lot of the information, but I'm actually going to properly read the 10 books. It's a saga called Mission Earth. And what that has in it, it's based around it's set in like 1980, so it's based around that time, and it's got a lot of present time information from 1980 present time about what's going on in the world with corruption and the CIA and the governments and the New World Order and all this crazy shit, and the Rockefellers. It's got a lot of information about that, and also has little bits of information about his own life. So basically, he said, you know, I'm outside the church, I'm going to write a massive science fiction saga which contains a lot of the information of what has occurred in my life, right? This seems to be what he did. Because when you read the book, you read this and you're like, this isn't fiction, this is, you know, he has a character called Rockefeller. Clearly that's Rockefeller, like it fits all the characteristics of Rockefeller. And he has other characters that are like clearly based on people who lived here on Earth, and there's moments where they're in a ship in the Mediterranean, and that's clearly based on a time when he actually was on a ship, the Apollo, in the Mediterranean. So it's a fantastic, the audiobook was fantastic. It was entertaining because it was a comedy. It was a science fiction funny comedy, and it was just great, and it contained a lot of good information, and the book's going to blow my socks off because I know it's going to have heaps of information about what's really going on in the world and what really happened with his life. Anyway, in that book, Mission Earth, right? The book's Mission Earth. There's a moment where the person who is handling the communications to the Emperor in the story is an SP, and he is telling everyone that this Emperor is issuing all these orders, but he's actually writing the orders himself. And the Emperor is a sick old man and is in bed and isn't even really talking, yet the Emperor is going out and saying, you know, this is what's happening, and the Emperor and he's like fake signing it and saying that the Emperor says we've got to do this and this and this, but the Emperor can't come out publicly because the Emperor is sick. And so the SP, the evil guy, got to do all the shit he wanted to do. This is exactly what happened with David Miscavige. Like, this is what L. Ron Hubbard's trying to communicate. You know what I mean? This is what he's trying to say, you know. He's put it into a fiction book so that people who know about Scientology history read it and go, hold on a second, L. Ron Hubbard's telling us what actually happened to his church and shit. Like, this is serious information. You don't know Scientology until you've read Mission Earth, and I don't even think you're a proper Scientologist until you've read those books, because seriously, they have so much information. They give you an insight into what's going on in the world and how L. Ron Hubbard approaches life and thinks and stuff. And there's characters in there that have different tone levels and stuff, like 1-1s and SPs and stuff. So you understand things and stuff, and uptone characters and how they approach life. It's fantastic, right? So there's also information about Atlantis in Mission Earth. This is how fantastic it is. Like, it talks about Atlantis and how it started and stuff. And I've been studying all these other sources and stuff and all these funky things, and information in Mission Earth backs up what some of these other sources are saying, where Atlantis apparently was a huge advanced civilization a long time ago when it got flooded by a big catastrophe or whatever. That's what's not around anymore. And only a few people survived, and that's who we are today, the surviving fragments of Atlantis. But apparently Atlantis was started by an extraterrestrial colony of aliens who looked, I think they look like us, because we're not the only planet that's occupied by people who look like this. Sorry, there's a fly. And so in the Mission Earth book and these other sources that are investigating and trying to understand Atlantis, it says that this extraterrestrial civilization landed on Earth and set up colonies. And that's why Atlantis was so advanced, because there was the primitive humans that were there, and then also these aliens that came down, and they were good aliens apparently, and they brought all their technology, and then we combined and we had this big civilization called Atlantis. And it wasn't just in the Atlantic Ocean where Atlantis was. It was also, I think, like in America, and apparently I think in Australia, because it was a worldwide civilization like what we've got going now. But anyway, there was a huge catastrophe and wiped out like everyone. Like, it was a massive thing. It was really, really bad. Anyway, so it's just amazing to see how smart L. Ron Hubbard was and how he incorporated it into a fiction story. He was educating you on Atlantis in the fiction story. It's genius, right? He's a genius guy. So, Mission Earth is basically like the book 1984, where it's like a fiction book, but it's exposing the truth. Anyway, so L. Ron Hubbard wrote this story, and he put information about his life in at Mission Earth and stuff. And then apparently he died in 1986. And of course, he wrote this massive saga, and he finished it. He finished the 10th book of it, and then he passed away. So that makes me feel like he definitely had control as to when he was going to die. Like, he didn't die at volume 7 of Mission Earth. You know what I mean? Like, he got to the end of it. You know what I mean? And it's like, he's this sort of person where he's in power, he sets goals and he achieves them. And I think that his health was bad as an old man, and he was just typing a lot, writing this story and stuff, and and then he finally finished it. Then he said, okay, I'm ready to pass away. And this happens a lot with old people, where they're married and their partner might die, and then they look around, they go, I'm old, my partner's died, and then they die not like only a year after that. And it's probably, if their partner had lived for another 10 years, they probably would have lived for another 10 years. Like, their thought has a control over them dying. Seriously. Now, especially when it comes to L. Ron Hubbard, right? Like, people can somehow choose to die. Like, seriously, that's how powerful your thoughts are. Like, somehow, you suddenly might just stop breathing in your sleep or something, or you might suddenly like have a heart attack and just die. You know what I mean? And it's partially because you've had the thought, I'm ready to die now and stuff. So I think that really is what happened with L. Ron Hubbard. And if you look at Scientology counseling, if someone gets sick, not someone who's old because they're in like a different category, but if you're like 30 years old and you get sick, in the counseling you'll go over before you got sick, and apparently you have to find a memory of when you decided that you want to get sick or something like that. So this is Scientology theory. This is why this is really true. This is how things happen in life. Your thoughts really can control reality. That's why the bad guys wanted to come after Scientology, because people were stopping taking their psych drugs and stopping going to medical, crappy medical, old-fashioned technology and stuff. They were going and doing Scientology to get healthy, and they didn't like that because you were taking their customer. They wanted to make money off people being sick. They don't like that Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard were making people healthier. They don't like that. Okay, so L. Ron Hubbard, it seems like he finished this epic saga and had all this information. He could no longer really get good information to or from the church. He was an old man. His wife was in jail from this drama with the Operation Snow White and how they infiltrated governments and stuff. And, it was time for him. He was just like, what else can I do? If I go out in public, I'm going to get assassinated and stuff. I'm old, He would finish the Mission Earth or whatever. He was ready to die. So he probably postulated, it's time for me to move on. And so apparently by this stage, David Miscavige and the shifty people who took over the church, the bad guys, and it was probably the CIA, seriously. Like they apparently assassinated Martin Luther King and stuff, and they've infiltrated other organizations and stuff. They had, at this stage, they had created RTC, and they'd basically taken over the church, and it's like the New World Order take over the church. It's like the dark side had taken over. So by early 1986, when L. Ron Hubbard died, the church had already been taken over for a few years and already was shit. And Captain Bill says this in 1983. He says, you can't get standard tech in the church anymore. The church has been infiltrated and taken over. The bad guys have taken over. And he said, make sure you get all your Scientology materials and save them and lock them up in a vault and make copies of them, because they're going to change the materials in the church, because they're going to delete the good information in L. Ron Hubbard's writings, which is exactly what they did in the years following. And so in 1983, Captain Bill was saying already by then the bad guys had taken over and the tech wasn't standard, and he was saying do independent Scientology, right? So what do you think it's like now? You know what I mean? That was in 1983. You know what I mean? Like now it's really been messed with. It's totally been changed. And I know, I've done a video on it. You can look it up. The tech changes to the books. They've taken out information out of the books and stuff. They also, in the early 80s, they also changed the OT levels. Now, here's another thing as well. The CIA knew about psychic people and how they had special abilities. They didn't like how Scientology was teaching people how to be psychic. They wanted that information. They wanted the OT level information for themselves. So what they did is they grabbed the OT level information, they pocketed it, then they re-released these new OT levels, right? Because they don't want people en masse in America and the world having these special abilities. The CIA want to keep these abilities to themselves. And that's what they've been doing since like the 70s and stuff. They've been working with psychics and shit. I'm not kidding. Russia's got their own psychics and stuff. They've been working with psychics, and they've been developing remote viewing and stuff. And they've been developing OT abilities, and they used Hubbard's materials to help them develop OT abilities and stuff. And they're using it as a weapon in war. Like they can use these psychic abilities. Psychics can find out information about the enemies and stuff. They're using it to their own advantage, right? But if everyone has these abilities, then they don't have the advantage. So they had to shut down Scientology, because L. Ron Hubbard was basically saying, hey everyone, you can be psychic, you can have these OT abilities, right? You can do these amazing things, right? And I'm going to teach you how to do it. And here you do OT1, you do OT2, you do OT3. And so that's why they wanted to get rid of him, because I was just like, no, this guy's not coming out with this information, you know what I mean? So they changed, from the early 80s onwards, they'd changed the tech in the church, and they'd corrupted it more and more so that Scientology doesn't work. And this bad guy that they'd put in place, David Miscavige, was now the new leader. And they groomed him and they put him into the position to take over the church. And they were like, fantastic, our guy has taken over the church. Now, you might say, this is all some crazy science fiction story, Andy, and you've got a wild imagination, you're making this crap up. Well, I've looked into 9/11, and many people have, and I'm telling you, the CIA full-on 100% caused 9/11. They did it from one of their secret underground military installations where they had screens now monitoring what was going on. They had plans, and they had plan Bs, and they had plan Cs, and they were going through it, and they were saying, now we're going to have the building collapse, and they planned the bombs, and it was all big setup. A huge, big operation. And they did it, and they got away with it. So are you telling me that they can't just take over some church? That's so easy for the CIA to do. They just go and put some plants in there, and they set it up, and they work at it for years. It's a pinch. When you compare it to 9/11, it's super easy for them to take over a church. So they took over L. Ron Hubbard's church. They stole it from him. So then L. Ron Hubbard was ready to die, and in early 1986, in January 1986, it looks like by this stage he'd had a heart attack, or he'd sort of passed out. And now the people who were in control of the church, Dave Miscavige and these shifty lawyers and the CIA or whatever, what they had to do is they had to change L. Ron Hubbard's will so that they got in control of all of L. Ron Hubbard's copyrights and all his materials and stuff, because they, want to be able to shut it down. Like, they don't want L. Ron Hubbard's will going all to his daughter, and then his daughter's in control of it, because they're like, oh, what the fuck? So part of their takeover plan was that they had to get all the copyrights into their name. This is where they created apparently the Church of Spiritual Technology, and maybe L. Ron Hubbard created that, but they stole it from him or something. But they set it up so that when L. Ron Hubbard passed away in early '86, then they held all the copyrights, and it went to their CST group, and in their CST group weren't even Scientologists, they were like lawyers and shit. And people might go, what are you talking about? The Church of Scientology is run by David Miscavige. He runs everything in Scientology and stuff, and David Miscavige's own father has said that. But that's just on the Scientology gold base. David Miscavige is the king, he's the king manager, but the owners you don't see. They're behind the scenes. This is exactly the same as a McDonald's. You walk into McDonald's and you see a 23-year-old manager that's walking around going, you do this, you do that, you do that. And people think, oh, that manager's a dictator. He's all in control of the McDonald's. And it's just like, no, there's actually a dude who owns McDonald's that visits it once every 6 months and just checks up on it and then leaves. He's the actual guy who owns the McDonald's, and he really makes the decisions. So CST and the people who are on the board of CST or whatever, they're not even SIs and they're apparently lawyers. They're the real people who own the church and actually control it. And David Miscavige just bullies people and pushes them around and stuff, and is just a control freak, and it's perfect because he makes it look like he's the ultimate dictator of Scientology, but he's not really. He's just kind of a bit of a puppet, but he just gets to push people around and have a lot of control on that base. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how complex things are? This is how the world works, and this is how McDonald's works. You know what I mean? So all these people like Lee Remini and Mike Rinder, they go, oh my God, David Miscavige, oh my God, he's the leader of Scientology, he's a dictator, he has ultimate control of Scientology. And it's just like, not really. There are owners behind the scenes who own L. Ron Hubbard's copyrights, and they're actually the ones who really can decide what can happen with Scientology. So, what happened since they took over the church in about 1982-83 onwards? They, of course, changed the OT levels, and they started shutting down the church. Like, they stopped advertising. Like, they really started to cut advertising. Because that was a big thing. They cut the Div 6, which was the missions. So they shut down the missions and tried to bankrupt them. Because they didn't want the missions functioning anymore. And they came up with some sort of crappy excuse, and they said it was L. Ron Hubbard who ordered it, but they probably manipulated the communications going to L. Ron Hubbard to try and try and convince L. Ron Hubbard that it was a good thing to shut down the missions. Anyway, long story. But people who are there actually on the base, they don't know intelligence ops and how shifty it is and what's really going on. So they just think, oh, L. Ron Hubbard ordered that the mission should be shut down. Oh, okay. But they don't really know the truth behind it. You know what I mean? There's a lot more going on. He might have actually ordered the missions to get shut down. They don't know that the communications were changed to him, the to and fro, and there's just so much going on, you know. This is why when you're shifty and you're smart like the CIA, you can just get away with doing outrageous stuff because people can get tricked. Now, so just before, the day before L. Ron Hubbard died, and this is why this is so dodgy. What a coincidence. The day before L. Ron Hubbard died, a new will was signed by L. Ron Hubbard, apparently, that said that he wanted to have his ashes cremated on the ocean. And it probably, I'm not really sure the details, but it probably also changed the will. You know what I mean? Because it looks like the last week of his life, like a lot of people are when they're slowly dying as an old person, they can't even really talk or think. So at that stage, they were like, okay, cool, so we can't really talk and think, we're going to change his will and stuff, and they probably falsified it and stuff. And on his will, of course, they're going to have him quickly cremated and died, so his just body is out of there, out of the situation, and then now we've got the will and we've got the copyrights because we changed the will and everything. So there's an operation, big operation. Apparently, actually, this whole operation to take over the church was called Operation Ramrod. I don't know that, you know, I don't know what to believe, but it seems like this is what happened. This was the CIA operation to take over the church. It was called Operation Ramrod, and David Miscavige was part of it. Because this is what they do, the CIA. They come up with names for operations. And it would be really interesting what they called Operation 9/11. But anyway, and they have checklists of what to do on their operation. So one of the things would have been, you know, make sure Hubbard's out of the scenes, no longer in communication with the church, then change the will, and then make sure the son's assassinated. And there's a list of things they need to do to take over the church. Make sure our man's controlling the communications to and from L. Ron Hubbard and stuff. So basically, before L. Ron Hubbard died, he was as good as dead, in that they'd already taken over the church. L. Ron Hubbard had no more power in the church, and they'd changed his will and stuff. And so then they apparently injected him with some psych drug, which is called, it was just some sort of nerve drug that was just like, it's like, I don't know, some sort of painkiller, Vestaril or some shit, some sort of painkiller or something. Because what it was that, and this happens with a lot of old people before they die, you give it to someone when they've had a heart attack or something, and it just makes death less peaceful. And it isn't like a suicide injection, but it's like something that you start using when the person's almost dead, and it stops pain and stuff. And it's pretty much when you start using that on someone who's old and sick, you're basically saying, yeah, this person's pretty close to dying. And so what probably happened is they made this new will the day before L. Ron Hubbard died. Then they injected him with an overdose of this Vestaril stuff, so that they would be like, okay, the final solution, we're going to finally kill him now. So they injected him, L. Ron Hubbard, this old man, they injected him with this thing, and then he's finally dead and he's out of the scenes. So I actually believe, personally from the evidence, I actually believe he did die at the start of 1986. It seems like that. But some people say late 82 because he seems to have disappeared from them, and it's because he didn't disappear, it's just that he had, by that stage, he'd totally lost control of the church from like late 82 onwards, and he did go quiet. And if you look at the policies that he released in 83, 84, 85, right, in the technical volumes, it drops right off. Like, it seems like he was writing shit in 82, and then suddenly just the amount of stuff coming from him drops right off. And so people think he died. I don't think he died. I think he dived into writing Mission Earth, to be honest, because there was a lot to write in those books. So I think those last few years of his life, he knew he had lost control of the church, and he was just writing Mission Earths. And he was just like, that's it, I'm just writing Mission Earths, you know. Because there's nothing else I can do. And then his health got to a point where he actually was nearly sick, and then he sort of postulated, you know, I'm ready to move on, and then he actually had a proper heart attack, and then he was half alive, and then they injected him with him and finally just killed him because he was like a vegetable, you know, he was just a vegetable. So, you know, a lot of old people have this problem with old people where they get to the point where the person, they haven't died yet, but they're just like, they're full on a vegetable, they're almost dead, and it's just like, you might as well give them a heavy dose of painkillers and just end it. Anyway, but now that they got the will signed, they were just like, okay, let's take him out. And so like, now they were going to inject him, and they took him out. And that was it. L. Ron Hubbard died in January 1986, and I don't know the date, but if he had made it to March, then he would have been 75 years old. So he died at 74 years old and almost turning 75. So he lived a full life, and also that was very normal for people to die around about that age, health-wise, back from that generation. Nowadays it's more common for people to make it to age 80 and above, but back then in 1980 it was very normal, and in 1970 and stuff, for people to die when they were 74 years old. It was, I mean, even now it's still normal, but like, it was totally normal back then. Like, he lived a proper earthling life, a full life, and he did a lot. And he also was a massive heavy smoker, because he was part of that generation, the parents of the baby boomers, who really liked smoking, and they used to chew tobacco and shit, and they were just heavy smokers. Anyway, so that's the story. That's what really happened to L. Ron Hubbard. I'm pretty happy with that. That's what all the evidence, this story that I told you, that's what all the evidence is indicating as to what happened to him. I'm happy with that. It seems true. I remember someone suggested once that L. Ron Hubbard didn't write the Mission Earth books, or someone else finished them off, and I disagree with that. From what I've listened to in the audiobooks, I mean, it's so L. Ron Hubbard. Especially you read the Battlefield Earth book, and then you read Mission Earth, and you can totally tell it's the same author. Like, it has a similar style to it, and it has a similar attitude, and the main characters are sort of, there's such a similarity. Like, I'm quite confident that L. Ron Hubbard fully wrote all of Mission Earth. And also, that book saga makes logical sense, because some people say that from like 1980 onwards, L. Ron Hubbard was losing his marbles and was lost in the head. Well, you can't write a full-on complex, very massive 10-book saga while you're losing your marbles, because the story would start not making sense. So, you know, I'm confident that he still had his marbles together all the way to the end. But his health might have sort of gone bad in, like, after he'd finished the last book, or even while he was writing it, but he could continue to type because it doesn't require that much effort. So yeah, and the way the book is, to me, it doesn't, I don't feel like someone else finished off the end to the story, because it was right to the last book of that, the last volume, the 10th volume. The way it's written, it's just so as if L. Ron Hubbard had wrote it. Like, it has this one character that he's writing, and then the one character's saying stuff in the story, and it's so L. Ron Hubbard impersonating 1-1 as the character, and it's just like, it's him. Like, and there's not many people who could recreate that. Even if you got Philip K. Dick, who was like he wasn't alive at that stage. He died as well under suspicious circumstances as well, and he was a big time author as well, and he was exposing the truth in his fiction books. I mean, again, he was another person who, like, he died when he was in his 50s, I think, or late 40s. He really died in suspicious circumstances. Like, I actually believe that L. Ron Hubbard, they might have injected him, but he was already pretty much gone, like, by natural causes. Like, he was already too old and stuff at that stage. But, you know, Philip K. Dick's another story. He really looks like he died. And I reckon as well, from the evidence, that Captain Bill also got assassinated, to be honest. It just seems like it. Like, you see this lecture that he delivered a year before he died, and he seems totally healthy. Like, he's still buzzing, alive and stuff, and he already spoken about how the people had tried to assassinate him years earlier. So it's just like, you know, he had to flee America because he was, the CIA and shit didn't like him so much. So it's just like, I reckon in 1991, Captain Bill also got assassinated. And there's all these alternative doctors, all these people who invented cures to cancer and shit who got assassinated. Like, this is how corrupt things are in the world. Anyone who's doing good just gets assassinated, you know? And some people survive it, you know, and you got to be real lucky. So that's it. That's what happened to L. Ron Hubbard. And apparently also, this is what Captain Bill says, that from like 82 onwards, Captain Bill reckons he was in telepathic communication, and I believe telepathy exists. I mean, I've looked into it a lot and it seems like it really exists. Apparently there's some alien races who just full-blown communicate with telepathy, like they don't even need to speak. And people who work at Area 51, right, in these underground, Area 51 is this huge, it's just some old sheds at the top in a desert, but underneath it's a huge underground facility. Like, I mean, it goes down like at least a kilometre down. Like, it's massive, right? And it's really wide. Like, you can fly things. They've got huge, you could think of them as like a giant gymnasium. You can like almost test fly them. So, well, actually, they would fly it a little bit, but they fly it up and then they fly it onto an elevator and then they fly it out. They go up in the elevator and the elevator goes out. Or maybe they have a chute, a tunnel, where you go up and you fly out and then it opens up and then you can fly out with your UFO, because they've got UFO technology at Area 51. That's why people are seeing all these UFOs. It's just advanced craft that the military invented. Apparently there are some aliens, reptilians, that the US government had signed a deal with, and helping us build our own like UFOs and stuff or something. They're doing genetic experiments or something in Area 51 in these underground bases. I know you're not going to believe any of this. Like I don't care. This is for people who are willing to just confront the truth. Like I know you're thinking, what the fuck, Andy? Where are you pulling this info from? But this is like top insider information, like whistleblowers and shit. Like this is, whoa. You know what I mean? This is serious stuff. And this is information as well from psychics who, you might go, these psychics are just making it up. But these psychics are people who you can put in a room like this. In the room next to it, you can write something on a piece of paper and they can say what is written on that piece of paper. And they can prove it time and time and time again. So they really have these special psychic abilities. Well, when you ask them what's in Area 51, and then they go and they use their psychic abilities and they find out what's in Area 51, they go, this is what's at Area 51. And you go, well, they're right about all these other things that you can test. They're probably right about this info as well. You go further. You go, let's take one psychic, let's say two psychics, let's say three psychics. And guess what? They all report the same thing about what's going on at Area 51. They say the same thing's happening to me, and they haven't talked to each other about their investigations with psychic abilities into Area 51. They say, yep, there's a tall green alien working there, a tall reptilian alien working there, and yep, these people are working on a UFO, building a UFO. They independently say that. That to me is damn hardcore evidence. Check out Courtney Brown's Farsight Institute. They look into amazing stuff. I get great information from the remote viewing Courtney Brown Farsight Institute stuff. And by the way, remote viewing was started by some Scientologists who were working with the CIA. And I listened to some people do a bit of remote viewing. It actually sounds like they're almost doing a bit of Scientology. Like it sounds similar. Like I can really tell it was influenced. L. Ron Hubbard didn't invent remote viewing, but he did make some discoveries that really contributed to the creation of remote viewing. Now, so at these underground bases, there are apparently like 8 foot tall, big, reptilians. Serious. And they can, and apparently the people who are whistleblowers about Area 51, they say that they will just walk up to the alien and they'd have a question, but they wouldn't have to actually ask it. The alien would just look at them and then answer the question with telepathy. So let's say they want to know what color they're going to use for the color of the UFO ship, for example. They turn to the reptilian. The reptilian already knows the question because he can read their minds. And then not only that, the reptilian doesn't even speak the answer. The reptilian just puts the answer into the guy's head. And the guy goes, oh, so it's green. Okay, cool. And the scientist is like, whoa, that is wild. I just turned to this guy. I didn't even have to talk to the guy, and he can communicate to me through telepathy and tell me the answer. So these alien races have telepathy, and we actually have it as well. It's just an ability that we've lost. This is serious shit. We can actually do telepathy, seriously. Now, an example of that is, the whole phone call thing where like you're thinking of a friend and then they call you at that moment. That's a bit of telepathy, you know what I mean? And if you work on that ability and you get better and better and better with it, eventually you don't just predict when your friend's going to call you on the phone. You can just sit there and you can get a full-on information from that friend that's like without having to use the phone, and because it's telepathy, Anyway, so Captain Bill talks about this, how telepathy is possible. I believe it's possible. Anyway, so apparently L. Ron Hubbard, who was a spiritual dude and in the early 80s was in seclusion away from the church, he apparently, which is what you would do if your church had been taken over and stuff, had got in, and you couldn't get letters to someone who you liked because the communication's being changed by David Miscavige, you would then try and do telepathic communication. Obviously, you're a spiritual dude and stuff, you can exteriorize, why don't you go visit him and stuff. So apparently L. Ron Hubbard was, this is what Captain Bill says, was telepathically communicating to Captain Bill. And Captain Bill wrote some comms that were by L. Ron Hubbard, but through him telepathically. And that's just a really interesting thing. And you can read some of those things at Ron's.org, but again, they'll just blow your mind because there's stuff that's just wild. And so I actually think that in those last few years of L. Ron Hubbard's life, he was doing some telepathic communications. He was also writing these mission Earths, and then he was just not doing anything like couldn't really do anything involved with the church because his communications were getting changed, but he still was doing some things. Like apparently he sang on some song, which was they released a song in 1986, the album. They released it after he died, but it was like some freedom album or something. And so L. Ron Hubbard's singing on one of those tracks. He's like, oh, and he's got a real deep voice because by that stage he was an old fat man and he was never really a singer, but he sings in some moments and he's like, I have to do, and it's like, it's just sort of funny. But he probably sang that like a year earlier from when they released it, or 2 years earlier. And so he was still alive, but he was just in bad health shape, and he was just doing a little bit involved with the church. He was writing mainly his fiction books, and he was doing a little bit of telepathic communications. And then he finally died in early 86. So I think that's it. I think that's the end of this video. This is what the evidence indicates. And I'll still keep my eyes open, still ask people questions and try and find out more about what happened. But that's the best answer I can come to. I don't think he died in 82. I don't think someone else wrote the Mission Earth books. I think this is what really happened. I do think that they actually injected him with a lot of stuff to take him out. I do think they changed his will. I do think bad guys took over the church. And if you look at the statistics since David Miscavige took over, after he had full control of the church, because it was still... Actually, the church starts going up and down rocky in the early 80s as soon as these bad guys took over the church. The statistics start going up and down and things start going a bit crazy in the church and a lot of people left. Like as in things were good and things were bad at the same time. And then from about 1990 onwards, the statistics, I don't know from where you are, that might be, I think that might be down or it might be up. Anyway, the statistics go just continually down since 1990. And the course rooms aren't as full, and the church has changed a lot of materials, and Scientology just isn't what it used to be. And that's because the bad guys took over. So the last thing I'll say is, I remember I was involved with the Melbourne church a few years ago, and someone mentioned how there used to be a girl that was like actually two girls who used to be prostitutes, and they were actually on staff at the Melbourne org, and they were working in HCO. Now HCO is where only the squeaky clean, really goody people work. But back in the late 80s in Melbourne, somehow these prostitutes were working in HCO. And apparently the head of HCO was sleeping with some of the prostitutes, right? So I remember hearing that, and they were talking about saying, wow, isn't that wild? Yeah, things were fucked up back then and stuff. And the thing is that everyone in the church these days thinks that, yes, things were messed up back then in the 80s, but things have been corrected and we've got rid of the bad guys, right? But the thing you don't understand is that when things were messed up in the 80s, the bad guy took over in the 80s. So everything got messed up and the bad guy took over, and then, yeah, they filtered out dodgy people who were prostitutes, and maybe there were some problems, and since then it's not as corrupt. Like it's not that crazy. Walking to Melbourne church is fine, but when that crazy period was going on in the 80s, a bad guy took over from L. Ron Hubbard, and David Miscavige makes himself look like he's a good guy, makes himself look like the best guy in the world and is helping Scientology, but he's actually a corrupt motherfucker that apparently doesn't even really believe in Scientology, and he changes the technology and is a corrupt dude and is no good for Scientology. But he acts like he's the real good moral guy, and he talks about how when it comes to when he releases a new versions of the books, he says how this SP goes, oh, back then in the past this bad SP did this and this bad SP did that, and he makes out that the past, you know, in the 80s and that were corrupt and stuff, and he's the savior and he fixed it up. But really, he's the bad mafia thug dude that took over the church. You know what I mean? So that's the last thing I want to say. I just want to put this idea, if anyone's listening to this video and they're a church member, just think of the idea. Do you know how the church puts out the idea that things were messed up back in the 80s and we fixed up the tech and everything's been fixed up since then? Well, imagine this. What if back then an actual SP took over the church and he's been in control ever since, and the church has fixed up, like gotten rid of some of those prostitutes, and like there wasn't a problem with prostitutes working for the church. I'm just using that as an example, but I just mean that like there might have been some dude in LA org who was doing some financial crime, stealing money for the church, or there was just dodgy people, you know. Imagine if the SP took over and he's been in control ever since. You know what I mean? He's not the savior. He's actually one of the bad dudes from back in that period who took over. I'm serious. So, David Miscavige is a bad guy. He's bad for Scientology. He's a classic SV. He fits all the characteristics and he's screwed up the church. And that's basically what really happened to L. Ron Hubbard and kind of Church of Scientology as a whole. Alright, so this video has just gotten a whole lot better. I thought I was going to finish the video there, but then I looked at some more information, and now this is like a second part of it. This is like 2 weeks later, and I'm going to add in more info. I'm going to go right down the rabbit hole because I just saw some things and I thought, like some stuff about David Miscavige changing from when he was a kid, and me being like, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, okay? Now, well, actually, I'm going to give you 4, right? But the 4th one is not correct, okay? So the 4th one is that David Miscavige was supposed to take over the church, and he's a good guy, right? And that one's wrong, because I know that church members think that one. So that one out of all these ones, I know for sure, 100% I'm sure it's wrong. Okay, if you look at all the evidence, it's just like, no, he's got suppressive personality traits. He hasn't helped the church. There isn't enough evidence indicating that L. Ron Hubbard left the church to him. If anything, it looks like he was in a position of command when Hubbard passed away, and he didn't even have full control of the church when Hubbard passed away. But as the years went on, he weeded out anyone who was competitive, and then finally he was a dictator by like about 1993, right? But he wasn't a full dictator in 1986 when Hubbard died. And there was no like announcement like, hey, I'm the successor to L. Ron Hubbard and stuff. Okay, so the option that David Miscavige is a good guy and that L. Ron Hubbard handed him the church, the control of the church, is not true, okay? So then there's the next option, and a lot of people believe this one, because especially independents, because this is very easily believable. And that is that David Miscavige is an SP. Cool, that's very likely. The evidence indicates that. And that that he's just screwed up the church, and so that's why people have left the church, and that's why Scientology has gotten more stuffed up. Okay, that one's very believable. That one's very possible. Okay, that doesn't involve conspiracies or anything like that. It's just that SPs like to rise to power and to take over churches and stuff and businesses and other things like that. It's very believable, very possible, very highly likely. Okay, he was just power hungry, and as a kid he didn't show heaps of suppressive traits, but he did like to get into fights and stuff. So there was some evidence of that. Okay. Now the next option is that the CIA or the government or some part of it took over the Church of Scientology, right? This is the whole conspiracy one. This one I'm very prone to believing. There's a lot of evidence for that. I really believe that. I believe that it was a plan that took them years to finish, but that's what they did, and that's what they do with many organizations. I believe that like the CIA and whatever these government departments don't just pick on churches and stuff. They pick on heaps of things and they try and, get in control of it. Scientology was exposing the truth and giving people psychic abilities and stuff, which they don't want people having. Like, they don't want people having the ability to remote view Area 51, because they've got secret shit in those underground bases. Their control relies on people being ignorant and not knowing about these things. But Scientology was making people aware of a whole other side of life, like a spiritual and a psychic and government corruption side of life that they really don't like. And so they infiltrated and worked out a way to take over the church. And I'm very much believing this one, okay? And I'm probably going to say, out of all the options, this is the one that I believe, right? There's one more one I'm going to finish off with. But That this is the one that I believe, okay? Now, how they did that is they either could have confronted David Miscavige, or they could have seen that he was a power-hungry SP, and they could have said, you know, let's get this guy into power, and they used lawyers to manipulate him and stuff. And you know what I mean? Like, they don't necessarily have to pain drug hypnotize him and say you're taking over the church or anything, because he doesn't really exhibit behavior of someone who's been PhD'd. Because you can sort of tell, usually people who have been PhD have a history of mental illness, or they've got something sort of crazy about them, whereas he's just got classic SP traits. Not so much the whole like, oh, I've been in the psych ward sort of like, which when people have been PDH'd, they look like they're sort of dopey and they look tired and they're like, oh, I can't remember, and oh yeah, and you'll find that they have an alcohol problem. Because they've just been keyed in and fucked up a bit. David Miscavige doesn't seem to exhibit that. He just seems to be a classic, straightforward, healthy SP. Like, the way they are, just like, just, I'm going to become in control of this, everything's going to be my way, and just blah, blah, blah. So, part of this takeover plan is, I think that they PhD'd Pat Broker, because Pat Broker was very close to L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard, he wasn't even really close to David Miscavige. David Miscavige was just a key figure on his communication line, but apparently L. Ron Hubbard was actually close to Pat Broker. Like, he was really close. He would be the best person in the world to interview on the podcast, my Indie Scientology podcast. I mean, that would just be, Jesus Christ. I mean, whoa. Talk about someone to interview. So Pat Broker, it seemed that Hubbard actually trusted Pat Broker and picked him and his wife Annie Broker, like they were top Commodore's messengers. And then the question is, why did Pat Broker start doing some bad behavior, like changing statistics and stuff like that and things? But then you hear as well of stories of Pat Broker trying to hide the OT levels from David Miscavige, like there was a power fight between Pat Broker and David Miscavige. So here's my conclusion, right? And also, Pat Broker doesn't exhibit behavior of being a power-hungry SP. This is kind of tricky. Okay. Anyway. Sorry. Well, let me. Hold on, I'm going to the specifics too much. Okay, so hold on, let me just clear this up. Okay, so the first option was that David Miscavige is good and Hubbard gave it to him. Okay, that's not true. The next option was that David Miscavige is an SP and he just took over the church and kicked out other people and screwed up the church. It's very likely, okay, and most people really should believe that. That's really the truth. And then the next level is going, no, the government infiltrated and maybe they used David Miscavige and Pat Broker and other people to take over the church. And that's the one I'm sticking with. And now the fourth one, okay, I'll just finish it off. The fourth one, I'll go back to the third one because I was going into specifics of how possibly the church was taken over with the third option, how the CIA took it over. Okay, which is really hard to find out specifics. It's like me saying, how did they specifically take down the 9/11 towers? And it's just like the information in that is so well hidden that you just never will be able to find out. It was so secret how the CIA set up 9/11 and all that sort of stuff. It's really hard to know exactly what happened, but you get the general gist of it. So I'm going to try and get the general gist of the number 3 option, okay? Now, number 4, which is a really down the rabbit hole one, the huge one, is that David Miscavige's body was taken over by an SP alien, right? And I know this is totally down the rabbit hole, but this is the David Icke type of answer, because David Icke believes that there's many elite people in the world who have had their bodies taken over by reptilian aliens or something, by aliens, and that's why they're evil and they don't act like humans, because they're not even human. They're just these power-hungry aliens, right? And also, Captain Bill suggests, he doesn't mention anything about reptilians, but he says something about Markabians taking over people's bodies who are in key positions in the world, because they're power hungry and they're not going to take over a toilet cleaner's body. They're going to take over the Queen's body, or they're going to take over the head of a CEO or the head of a church. Do you know what I mean? And he suggests that, and he also suggests how they have the ability to that the alien civilization has the technology they can control spirits and stuff, and they can just knock out a spirit out of a body, knock out a Thetan and take over the body and stuff. And so listening to David Miscavige's dad talk about how his son just changed, and then for the rest of his life his son was never the same, and his son was the leader of the Church of Scientology, and his son would giving gifts on his birthday, but that was it. I mean, that to me, the behavior indicates, like, you know, let's say if you're going to go take over someone's body, you'll be like, okay, I'll take over the body. Oh, I have to give my dad a gift every year. You know what I mean? Like my pretend dad, he's not really my dad. He doesn't know. I've taken over someone's body. I'll give him a gift every birthday, and then that'll shut him up, and then he won't be suspicious, and he won't know that I've taken over his body. You know what I mean? Taken over his son's body. You know, like, it's just, this is really down the rabbit hole, right? I'm not going to say this one's true, by the way, but I just thought it might well be suggested, right? Because David Icke is going on about it, and he's right about so many things. He's just right about so many things. And then LRH apparently said this as well, right? I don't know if it's written anywhere, but he said, I've heard from a good source, I've heard that that what's the word, that that a Thetan can take over another body of someone else's. Can, like L. Ron Hubbard apparently said that. He said that when they were in there, like on the Apollo ship and stuff like that, someone who L. Ron Hubbard was friends with would suddenly be an SP, and someone asked him, and Hubbard goes, yeah, because it's not the same Thetan. Like, the body got, the Thetan got kicked out of the body, and then the new Thetan came in, like an SP one. It's really interesting. It's really out there, but the thing we have to understand is that these if there is an alien civilization that travels to other planets and likes to take them over, or I don't know, it's just, if you look at what the CIA does on Earth, these shifty little things, you can just imagine in a million years' time the technology that the CIA would have and the sorts of things they could do. They could do stuff like literally knock a spirit out of a body and then take over the body. And I don't know, it's just, it's kind of interesting. Like, apparently the aliens, and this is from good sources as well, they have UFOs that you can control with your mind. So it's like you don't have to pull levers and buttons to fly the craft. You think like left and right, and it's like tapped into your mind, and it's like thought recognition technology, and you fly around and you tap, and that's how it controls it, with your mind. And that's why when some of these UFO crashed, like in Roswell, because that was really true, by the way, that actually happened. That Roswell full-on happened. It's been covered up, but it full-on happened. There's all these whistleblowers about it. When the military came across these crashed craft, they were just like, what the hell? Like, trying to look at it and understand it, because it used like some sort of radiation and fusion energy and like just an amazing engine to fly and stuff. But also there was no like simple buttons and levers to like turn it and stuff. It was just so advanced. They had to like hire the best scientists to work on it for like decades to try and understand how the hell it works and how to build their own. So I just thought I'd mention that, like, this fourth option, which is totally down the rabbit hole, just don't think it's ridiculous, you know. I would keep my eye out to see if there's more evidence for it, of SPs taking over bodies. Anyway, so I think I've mentioned all the different options. So it's possible that David Miscavige could have had his body taken over by Mark Habian, because there's some scientists who believe that. Seriously, some independents believe that. So that's, you know, really out there. And I remember that the person who mentioned this as being a possibility, that a Mark Habian... wait, did you say Mark Habian? Well, he said Mark Habian took over the church. So, anyway, this is so out there. This is sort of ideas and stuff. I mean, one day I'll probably have an answer that I'll be able to say definitely, but at the moment I'm going with option 3. It's very, very likely, but who knows? I mean, if there are these Mark Habians or these reptilians, they would obviously be in positions that are like head of CIA. You know what I mean? Like, they would, or head of operations in CIA or something. And so you could end up getting a Markabian infiltrating the church. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, yeah, anyway, in a human body or something like that. Or anyway, L. Ron Hubbard said there were Markabians walking around and you can't even tell it because they look just like you and me. So it's so complete. When you got a universe out there with all these planets and all this stuff going on, and Earth where we're getting all this stuff's being kept secret from us, it's just so confusing. It's such a friggin' mess. Our history is just such an absolute mess and confusion with all this shifty stuff going on. So I'll go back to number 3, which is the one that I believe, and I'll go back to the specifics of how I think they specifically took over the church. Now, I think they PhD'd Pat Broker. The reason for that is that he apparently was an alcoholic. Now, that's a symptom of people who have been PhD'd. A lot of the former astronauts, they received PhDing after their trips to outer space because of certain things that they found out with their job, and they had to have their memory wiped. In fact, a lot of people who work in these government underground bases and who do really confidential stuff, what they receive at the end of it is called a debriefing. And in the debriefing, there's probably a little bit of debriefing, but there's also just brainwashing, like full on, like, you know, the mind control shit where they PhD them and they erase their memory. And nowadays I think they've got electrical technology. Back then it would have been the whole drug thing, but nowadays they do it with like pure implants. They've got the electronic tech that's so advanced. And by the way, the aliens helped us develop it, apparently, because we've made a deal with them, and they're helping us develop craft as well. Just some, not many. Like not many aliens in that, but there are some, seriously, some aliens in these underground bases. Gosh, this is deep. I can't even remember where I was at. I'm distracted by this friggin' light. I'm going to change them around. They're made of that fluorescent light. It's actually unnatural. It keys you in. It's unhealthy. The incandescent ones are much healthier. So, what was I saying? Okay, so I think that Pat Broker, who was the closest, he seemed like he was the closest man to L. Ron Hubbard from like 1978 onwards. Because, you know, people say like David Mayo and stuff, but David Mayo was busy auditing people and stuff. And I know he audited LRH for a bit, but apparently when LRH went into hiding like properly in like 78 or something, he took Pat Broker with him. Because Pat Broker apparently was into spy books and James Bond and that sort of stuff. So that was his area that he studied and he looked into and stuff. So, and L. Ron Hubbard was into that as well. And L. Ron Hubbard knew about that. He was a former trained intelligence officer. So I feel like LRH took Pat Broker, who was kind of like his little James Bond guy, or he was just one of the, I don't know how many people he was with from 78 onwards, but he just had a little team, like really little, around him, and he was writing fiction and stuff, and they were really close to source. So if people were looking to take over the church and stuff, that would be definitely someone who the CIA would look into snatching in the middle of the night or something like that, and PDHing. And this is where it goes so deep, right? But I've been looking into so many things, and it's very likely. So by this stage, they had UFOs. The government had UFOs, and they were apparently abducting people. It's called military MILABs, because it definitely seems like aliens abduct people, but it also seems like our own military is abducting people. Now that they've got these UFOs and UFO technology. And so I heard that in the 70s, involved with the Montauk, which was the Montauk underground base, they'll go out in vans and they'll abduct 14-year-old kids and they'll brainwash them. But they've always been, the CIA had always been abducting people. But it moved into I think it moved into them actually using UFOs to abduct people. And Stephen Greer, who's a top truther when it comes to UFOs, says this. He says a lot of people have a bad idea of, he actually believes that all the aliens are good, and I disagree with him with that, but he thinks that the reason why they've gotten a bit of a bad name is because of these military abductions, and people are thinking they're getting abducted by aliens in UFOs, but it's actually us in UFOs. It's just crazy, but it's seriously what's going on. There's just so many people claiming it. So it's quite possible that Pat Broker could have been abducted with a UFO. Seriously, I mean, if they're doing it to 14-year-old boys in New York City, like why the hell wouldn't it, let's go there. Like, why wouldn't it have been possible that Pat Broker could have been abducted with a UFO? And the reason why I say UFO is because, I mean, they could have abducted him in a van or something, but it's harder to get away from a UFO or something. Like, they've got more advanced technology that can like stun the person and capture them easier or something. Okay, so Pat Broker could have been PDH'd, and that's why he could have done dodgy things, because he was PDH'd. But also it seems like he was trying to, if he was trying to stop David Miscavige from getting in control of the church, I feel like maybe he was trying to make the best of a bad situation, and he was trying to keep the OT levels of the tech away from David Miscavige because he was an SP, and that they'd realised that at that stage. It's really hard to tell the truth in this situation and what happened, but all I know is that he had apparently which again makes me think that Pat Broker, L. Ron Hubbard really did trust Pat Broker. He had the alcohol problem, which is strange for a Scientologist, but then it makes sense that if, and he had that anxiety when he's on stage speaking and stuff, which alcoholics have, and that's why they have the alcohol, because it chills them out, because they're like, and then the alcohol chills them out, but that's after they've gone through the traumatic experience of being PDH'd that gave them the anxiety. Because I don't think Aaron Hubbard would be hanging out with an alcoholic. So I think that it's hard to tell. He could have been anyway, but apparently he had the high level OT level. He had the like OT 8, 9, and 10 or something. And David Miscavige was trying to get it off him, and I think David Miscavige might have succeeded in stealing it off him. And it's kind of questionable. Like, this is after Hubbard died. It's kind of like, what went on there? Like, he was and some people say because Pat Broker wanted to become the king of the church or something, but his behaviour doesn't exhibit that and stuff, and I don't know, like, I don't know. It's tricky, but it's possible that Pat Broker could have been a good guy trying to protect the church, and then David Miscavige managed to get the OT levels off him, or maybe he didn't, maybe he managed to get some of them, and then Pat Broker did a runner and just left Scientology, and that's it. And David Miscavige monitored him for like 25 years, paid for private detectives to monitor Pat for 25 years. So I feel it's kind of interesting. Why would he be monitoring him for so long? Maybe he was really worried because Pat really knows information about Scientology. Definitely it looks like they don't trust each other and they don't agree with each other. So maybe Pat was actually a good guy. It would be really interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that Pat was a good guy trying to pretend to protect the church, but David Miscavige took it over. Anyway, it's tricky. So I don't know what to say. I was just trying to work out the specifics of how the CIA took it over, which will be really hard, and maybe there'll never be an answer to. But I'm really pretty damn sure if there were people trying to assassinate Hubbard and stuff, I'm pretty damn sure that that the CIA were trying to do dodgy shit and using PhDing to take over the church. I'm pretty sure. And Hubbard, that's why Hubbard ordered this drastic Operation Snow White with the Guardian's office, because it was like he knew how crazy the situation was and that the church would get taken over and go down the toilet. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just do nothing, because that's the motto of a Scientologist, right? The worst thing to do is nothing. And that's true, because if he did nothing, And the church would have just been taken over. So he was like, shit, we have to go in sneakily and try and change the government documents and stuff, because otherwise we're going to go down the toilet. And so they tried and they failed, and that was it. But at least they tried, you know. Because a lot of people criticize the Guardian's office, especially the Scientology haters, for what they did. But it's just like, you don't know the intel that they knew. They might have known about all this PhDing, or they did know, but they, like, about all the crazy PhDing and how they were planning on banning Scientology and just they're planning on infiltrating it and all this crazy shit they knew about in the GO. And so, you know, it's interesting. So they had to do something. So yeah, that's the specifics of it. I think it's possible that David Miscavige was a plant by the CIA. It's very possible. I feel like there's not quite with Pat Broker. I'm just not quite sure what's going on there. It's questionable. But hey, he could have just been an SP and he just was, you know, there around about that time. And it's just so crazy telling. It's like, tell me how Jesus died. Like, it's just, the story is so freaking complex and confusing. At least this one can get a lot closer to the truth. And hopefully in 3,000 years' time, we're more certain about what actually happened to L. Ron Hubbard in those last few years, and it's not all confusing. But the whole of this is just such typical Earth stuff to have happen. It's just so typical. The history of Earth is an absolute mess. It's an absolute joke. There's been a pole shift. There have been great floods. There's been this great ancient civilization called Atlantis. There's been previous aliens visiting us ages ago, and there's been aliens visiting us now, and it's all such a mess. Anyway, so I'll just finish up. The two options, all right? David Miscavige is an SP. He took over the church, and that's why the church has turned bad. And Hubbard passed away in 86, and David Miscavige helped create that and helped change the church by changing the communications and shit. And then he took over when Hubbard left. That is very, very likely, and doesn't involve crazy conspiracies. It's just how SPs behave. The next one is the whole government communication. The next one that's very likely is the whole... I'm not going to mention the crazy alien one because that's just too out there as a reality of being true. But the second one that's really likely, which I personally believe, is that the church got taken over by the CIA. Alex Jones, for example, would be a great person. If he became a Scientologist and studied all the information for years, it would be interesting to see what he thinks of what happened, and I really feel like he would agree with me as well. He would go, yeah, it looks like the CIA did a whole operation on the church and took it over. Because he talks about this sort of stuff all the time. He knows how the CIA operate. It's very likely they took it over and that they planted David Miscavige in there, or they just helped put him into power, and then they knew that he would just screw the church up or whatever. But either way, whatever. So those are the two options that are very believable, that you should believe. I think you should go with the government conspiracy thing, because the American government is just so messed up and so corrupt. Like, they were just if you look into it more and more, you find out about this crazy shit. Like I mentioned earlier, how they were abducting boys in New York City. They were taking those boys down into these underground bases, and you know, PhDing them and programming them and shit. Apparently, they did it to a lot of them, and they were like abusing these kids. It was like, you think Hitler was bad with the concentration camps and stuff, but like, I mean, these kids were like fucking beaten up and shit, and like brainwashed, and just really, really bad stuff. Okay, this is why L. Ron Hubbard was so passionate about the Sea Organ, so intense, because it was like, there's really crazy shit going on in this world. And now you got this whole transgender thing. But anyway, so that's my video. I hope I answered some questions in this long video. I had to be really long. Had to keep on going on because there's so much information in this to take in. But, you know, anyway, Hubbard died in 86. The government helped take over his church, and they helped... I think Hubbard willfully died at that stage, but they helped create it from years and years of the government making his life harder. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for listening to this KR. I've been Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. Take care of yourself and get up that bridge.
little space cowboy.